The first thing Commander Marcus Cole felt was cold. And it was the kind of cold that went deep into his bones and made his teeth want to chatter. He opened his eyes slowly and found himself staring at a ceiling that looked like it was made of dark purple crystal. And strange lights moved inside the crystal like tiny fish swimming through deep water. Where was he? The last thing he remembered was fire and screaming and the sound of his ship breaking apart around him. And he remembered grabbing Private Jensen and trying to pull her toward the escape pods. But then something had hit him hard, and everything had gone black now. He was here, wherever here was. And he was alone. Marcus tried to sit up and pain shot through his left arm like lightning. And he looked down to see a deep gash running from his elbow almost to his wrist, and the wound was still bleeding. Dark red blood dripping onto the smooth floor beneath him. Pressed his right hand against the wound and hissed through his teeth because it hurt badly. But he had felt worse pain before, and he knew he would survive this if he could just stop the bleeding. The room around him was small and empty, except for a low bench made of the same purple crystal as everything else. And one wall seemed to shimmer like it was not quite solid. And Marcus guessed that was some kind of force field or energy barrier keeping him trapped. Inside he was a prisoner. Then Marcus forced himself to stand even though his head was spinning and his arm was throbbing with every heartbeat. And he walked to the shimmering wall and looked through it into a long hallway beyond. What he saw made his blood run even colder than the air in his cell. There were creatures in that hallway, tall and thin with bodies like insects but standing upright like humans. And their skin was a deep blue-black color that seemed to absorb the light around them. And their heads were elongated with huge multifaceted eyes that reflected everything like mirrors. The Volcara Marcus had heard stories about them during his training at the academy. And none of those stories were good, and most of them ended with entire species being wiped out of existence. The Valkyrie were old. Older than humanity had even known that other intelligent life existed in the galaxy. And they had built an empire that stretched across 1,000 star systems. And they had never lost a war in all their long history. Every species that had stood against them had been destroyed. Their worlds burned and their people scattered like dust in the solar wind. And now Marcus was their prisoner too. Of the creatures turned to look at him through the shimmering barrier, and their mirror eyes showed him his own reflection. And he looked terrible with blood on his uniform, and his face pale from blood loss. One of them made a clicking sound with its mandibles, and the other responded with a series of high-pitched chirps. And Marcus could not understand their language, but he could read body language well enough to know they were talking about him. They were waiting for something. He realized, and he had a feeling he knew what it was. They were waiting for him to die. The wound on his arm was serious, and he had already lost a lot of blood. And to these aliens, that probably meant he was already finished. Just a dead man who had not stopped moving yet. But Marcus Cole was not ready to die. Not today, and not in some alien prison cell 1,000 light years from home. He tore a strip of fabric from the bottom of his uniform shirt and wrapped it tightly around his wounded arm, pulling the makeshift bandage as tight as he could stand it. And the pressure hurt, but it would help slow the bleeding. The two Valkyrie guards watched him do this with what might have been curiosity or might have been confusion. And their multifaceted eyes never blinked as they observed his every movement. Marcus sat down on the crystal bench and took slow, deep breaths to calm his racing heart, because panic would only make him bleed faster and think slower. And right now he needed to be calm, and he needed to think his crew was dead. He was almost certain of that now. And his ship was destroyed, and no one knew where he was. And he was wounded and trapped and surrounded by enemies who had never shown mercy to anyone. But he was still alive, and as long as he was alive, there was hope. Hours passed. Or at least Marcus thought hours passed, because it was hard to tell time in a place with no windows and no clocks. And during that time, more Valkyrie came to look at him through the barrier. Some of them were guards in dark armor, and some of them wore flowing robes that might have marked them as scientists or priests or something else entirely. And all of them stared at him with those unblinking mirror eyes. Marcus stared back at them and refused to look away, because he would not give them the satisfaction of seeing fear in his eyes, even if fear was exactly what he was feeling. The bleeding from his arm had slowed to a trickle now, and the pain had faded to a dull ache that he could push to the back of his mind. And he was starting to feel a little stronger, even though he was desperately thirsty. Then the shimmering barrier flickered and 4 armored guards stepped into his cell with weapons pointed at his chest. And one of them made a sharp clicking sound and gestured toward the hallway they wanted him to walk, and Marcus was happy to oblige because anything was better than sitting in this cold, empty room waiting to find out what would happen. Next, the guards surrounded him as he walked, 2 in front and 2 behind, and their weapons never wavered from pointing at him, even though he was unarmed and wounded and clearly no threat to anyone. They led him through hallways of purple crystal and past doorways that opened onto rooms full of strange machinery, and past windows that showed the blackness of space outside. And Marcus realized he was on a ship, a massive ship far larger than anything humans had ever built. Finally, they stopped in front of a door that was taller than the others and covered in intricate carvings that seemed to move and shift when Marcus was not looking directly at them. And the guards stepped aside, and the door slid open silently. The room beyond was enormous, a great hall with a ceiling so high it disappeared into shadow, and the walls were lined with thousands of Valkyrie standing in perfect rows like soldiers at attention. And at the far end of the hall, sitting on a throne carved from a single massive crystal, was the largest Valkyrie Marcus had ever seen. She was at least 3 meters tall, with a body that was longer and more elegant than the others. And her carapace was not blue-black, but deep purple shot through with veins of gold. And a crown of crystalline spikes rose from her head like a deadly halo. Queen Silitha, ruler of the Valkyrie Dominion, destroyer of worlds, the ancient one who had personally overseen the extinction of 11 intelligent species, and now she was looking at Marcus with those huge mirror eyes, and he could see himself reflected in them. Small and wounded and alone, bring the human closer, she said, and her voice was surprisingly smooth and cold, like wind blowing over ice. The guards shoved Marcus forward, and he stumbled, but caught himself and walked the rest of the way with his head held high because he would not crawl before this creature, no matter how powerful she was. He stopped at the base of her throne and looked up at her, and his arm was bleeding again from the rough treatment, but he ignored it. So, this is a human, the queen said, and she leaned forward on her throne to study him more closely. I expected something more impressive. Sorry to disappoint you, Marcus said, and his voice came out stronger than he expected. Maybe try capturing someone who has not just survived a shipwreck. The queen made a sound that might have been a laugh, or might have been something far more dangerous. And the thousands of Valkyrie in the hall went completely silent. You have spirit, she said. That is good, because you are going to tell me everything about your species before you die. And I do prefer my prey to have some fight in them. Marcus looked at the blood dripping from his bandaged arm and then looked back at the queen. I am going to tell you nothing, he said, and I am not planning to die anytime soon. The queen tilted her head in that insectoid way of hers, and her mirror eyes reflected his wounded arm. And something like amusement crossed her alien features. Your body is already failing, she said. You have lost too much vital fluid and the wound will not close. And by morning, you will be dead like all the others of your kind we have captured. She did not know, Marcus realized with sudden clarity. She did not know what human bodies could do, for the first time since he woke up in that cold cell. Marcus allowed himself to smile. We will see about that, he said. Your Majesty. The interrogation began an hour after Marcus was brought before the Queen, and they put him in a smaller room with smooth walls that seemed to glow with their own pale light. Queen Silitha did not conduct the questioning herself, because apparently that was beneath someone of her status. But she watched through a window of dark crystal that Marcus could not see through from his side. The interrogator was a Valkyrie with silver markings on its carapace and a voice that clicked and hissed in ways that made Marcus think of angry insects trapped in a metal box. And it asked him the same questions over and over again. Where is your homeworld located? How many ships does your species have? What are your weapons capable of? Where are your military bases? Marcus answered none of these questions, and instead he made jokes about the quality of the accommodations, and asked if room service was available, and wondered aloud if the Valkyrie had ever heard of interior decorating. The interrogator did not understand his humor, but it understood that he was not cooperating, and its clicking voice grew sharper and more frustrated as the hours passed. But the strange thing, the thing that Marcus noticed was making the interrogator increasingly nervous, was that he was not dying. His arm still hurt, and the wound was still there, but the bleeding had stopped completely now. And when he looked at it closely, he could see that the edges of the cut were starting to close together all on their own. The interrogator noticed it too. What are you doing to yourself? It demanded, pointing at his arm with one long segmented limb. What trick is this? No trick, Marcus said, and he held up his arm so the creature could see it better. This is just what human bodies do when they get hurt. We heal. The interrogator stared at him with those multifaceted eyes, and Marcus could see his own reflection broken into 100 tiny pieces in each one. And the creature looked confused in a way that seemed almost comical. Heal? It repeated, as if the word was foreign to it. Yes. Heal, Marcus said slowly, like he was explaining something to a child. You know, the wound closes up and new skin grows, and eventually it is like it never happened. Do your people not do that? The interrogator did not answer, but instead it turned and left the room so quickly that its long robes made a snapping sound behind it. And Marcus was left alone with only the glowing walls for company. He took the opportunity to examine his wound more carefully, and he was pleased to see that it was healing even faster than he had expected, and a thin layer of scab was already forming over the deepest part of the cut. Whatever medical technology these aliens had, Marcus guessed that they had never needed to develop anything to help with natural healing, because they apparently did not have any. This was interesting information, and Marcus filed it away in his mind for later use. The interrogator returned after what felt like another hour, and this time it was not alone, because behind it came 3 more Valkyrie wearing robes of different colors, and they carried strange devices that hummed and blinked with light. Scientists, Marcus guessed. They had brought scientists to look at him. The scientists approached him cautiously, like he was a dangerous animal that might bite, and they waved their humming devices over his body and clicked at each other in their language, and their movements became more and more agitated as they continued their examination. One of them focused on his wounded arm and made a high-pitched, keening sound that made the others stop what they were doing and cluster around him. Look, this is impossible, one of them said, and Marcus was surprised to hear it speak in his language. The tissue is regenerating. The cells are multiplying and replacing the damaged ones. I told you, Marcus said. Humans heal. Is that really so strange? The scientists looked at him and then looked at each other, and Marcus could tell even through their alien features that they were afraid. Truly and deeply afraid of what they were seeing. No species regenerates autonomously. The one who spoke his language said, damaged tissue dies, wounds do not close. This is the way of all living things. This has always been the way. Not for humans, Marcus said. And he smiled, even though smiling probably looked terrifying to creatures who did not have mouths that moved the same way. On my world, this is completely normal. A cut like this would not even get me sent home from work. The scientists retreated to the corner of the room and clicked frantically at each other. And Marcus watched them with growing amusement because he was starting to understand just how strange he must seem to these creatures. All his life he had taken healing for granted. Everyone on Earth did, and you got a cut and it scabbed over and eventually it healed. And that was just how bodies worked, but apparently that was not how bodies worked for the rest of the galaxy. The door opened again, and this time Queen Silitha herself entered the room. And her massive form seemed to fill the entire space. And the scientists and the interrogator all bowed their heads as she passed. She stopped in front of Marcus and looked down at him with those huge mirror eyes. And he could see that something had changed in her expression since their first meeting. She was not amused anymore. "Show me the wound," she commanded. Marcus held up his arm without hesitation because he had nothing to hide, and honestly he was enjoying the effect it was having on everyone. And the queen leaned in close to examine it. The scab was thicker now, and the edges of the wound had pulled together even more. And tiny threads of new pink skin were visible beneath the dried blood. The queen stiffened, her entire body going rigid like someone had frozen her in place. And her mirror eyes went wide in what Marcus could only interpret as shock. "This cannot be real," she whispered. And her voice had lost all of its cold confidence. "I promise you, it is very real," Marcus said. "By tomorrow the wound will be half closed, and in a week it will be nothing but a scar. And eventually, even the scar will fade." The queen did not move for a long moment, and the room was so silent that Marcus could hear the hum of the scientist's devices and the rapid clicking of the guards' mandibles as they shifted nervously. "You were supposed to be dead by now," the queen finally said. "Every creature we have ever captured with wounds like yours has died within hours. Their fluids drain away and their bodies fail and they simply stop. But you are still here, and you are getting stronger. Humans are tough," Marcus said simply. "We evolved on a planet that tried to kill us every single day for millions of years. And we survived because our bodies learned to repair themselves, learned to fight off infection, learned to keep going even when everything was trying to tear us apart." The queen took a step back from him, and Marcus saw something in her eyes that he had never expected to see: their fear. "What else can your kind survive?" she asked quietly. Marcus thought about all the things humans had lived through. The diseases and the wars and the disasters and the accidents. And he thought about people who had lost limbs and kept fighting. People who had survived falls that should have killed them. People who had been shot and stabbed and burned and had still gotten back up. "More than you can imagine," he said. "Much more." The queen turned to her scientists, and her voice was sharp and commanding when she spoke. "I want a full analysis of this creature's biology," she said. "I want to know everything about how its body functions, every detail no matter how small. And I want the results before the next cycle begins." The scientists bowed their heads and scurried out of the room. And the queen looked at Marcus one more time with those mirror eyes full of something that might have been respect or might have been terror. "You are not what I expected, human," she said. "Neither are you," Marcus replied. "I expected you to be taller." The queen made that sound again, the one that might have been a laugh. But this time, there was no amusement in it at all. She left the room without another word, and the guards took Marcus back to his cell. And as he sat down on the cold crystal bench, he looked at his arm and smiled. The wound was still closing, still healing, still doing what human bodies had done for thousands of generations. And somewhere on this ship, an ancient queen who had destroyed 11 species was learning to be afraid. That felt like a victory to Marcus. And in his current situation, he would take any victory he could get. The scientist worked through the night, and Marcus knew this because guards kept coming to his cell to take samples of his blood and scan him with their humming devices. And they always looked at him with that same expression of nervous fear. By the time what passed for morning arrived on the Valkyrie ship, Marcus felt tired, but his wound was healing beautifully, and the scab had hardened into a protective shell, and the skin beneath it was knitting together exactly as it should. Was given water and some kind of nutrient paste that tasted like chalk mixed with sadness. But he ate it anyway because his body needed fuel to continue its repair work. And he was not about to let something as simple as bad food slow down his recovery. The guards came for him again and took him through the winding crystal hallways to a room he had not seen before. A room filled with glowing screens and strange machines and more Valkyrie scientists than he could count. Queen Celida was already there, sitting on a smaller throne that had been placed against one wall. And her mirror eyes followed Marcus as the guards led him to the center of the room. Begin. The queen commanded one of the scientists, the same one who had spoken Marcus's language before, stepped forward with a device in its hands that projected images into the air between them. We have completed our analysis of the human's biology, the scientist said, and its voice was trembling slightly. What we have discovered is unprecedented in all our records of known species. The projected images shifted to show what Marcus recognized as a diagram of human cells, and he watched with interest as the scientist began to explain. The human body possesses a system we have never encountered before, the scientist said. When tissue is damaged, specialized cells immediately begin to multiply and migrate to the wound site, and they produce proteins that cause the damaged tissue to seal itself and regenerate. We heal, Marcus said helpfully. I believe I mentioned this. The scientist ignored him and continued, its voice growing more agitated with each word. But that is only the beginning. Because we also discovered that human bones contain a remarkable property. And when a human bone is broken, it does not simply remain broken. Instead, the bone repairs itself, and in the process it becomes stronger and denser than it was before. The queen leaned forward on her throne, her mirror eyes fixed on Marcus. Their bones grow stronger when damaged? She asked. Yes, my queen, the scientist confirmed. We ran simulations based on our data, and the results suggest that a human who has broken many bones over their lifetime would have a skeleton significantly more durable than one who has never been injured. Marcus nodded because this was true, and he had broken several bones during his time in the military, and his doctors had always told him that those healed breaks were now the strongest parts of his skeleton. There is more, the scientist said, and now it was definitely trembling. The human body contains an entire system dedicated to identifying and destroying foreign organisms. A system they call the immune system. And it is essentially a biological army that patrols their blood and tissue looking for threats. New images appeared showing white blood cells attacking bacteria and viruses. And Marcus felt a strange sense of pride watching his own body's defenses depicted on an alien screen. These cells hunt invaders, the scientist explained. They identify anything that does not belong and they destroy it. And if the human survives the initial infection, their body remembers the threat and becomes even more effective at fighting it in the future. They become immune, another scientist added, its voice barely above a whisper. They cannot be killed by the same disease twice. The queen rose from her throne and walked slowly toward Marcus, and the scientist parted before her like water flowing around a stone. Is this true? She asked him directly. Your body learns to fight disease? Yes, Marcus said. Humans have survived plagues that killed most of our population, and the survivors passed their resistance to their children. And now those diseases cannot touch us anymore. The queen circled around him slowly, studying him from every angle like he was some kind of exhibit in a museum. What else? She demanded, turning back to her scientists. What else can this species do? The lead scientist swallowed, which Marcus found interesting because he did not realize Valkyrie could swallow. And then it continued its report. Humans can survive the loss of massive amounts of blood, it said. Up to 40% of their total blood volume, and they can still recover if treated quickly. And their bodies will simply produce more blood to replace what was lost. They can also survive the loss of limbs and organs. Another scientist added, "We found records indicating that humans have removed entire organs from their own bodies in order to give them to other humans who needed them. And both the giver and receiver survived." The queen stopped moving and stared at the scientist. "They remove their own organs and live?" she asked. "Yes, my queen. And they do this voluntarily?" "Yes, my queen. They do it to save each other." Marcus felt a small smile tugging at the corner of his mouth because he could see how insane this must sound to creatures who apparently died from a paid race. Single serious wound, perhaps. The most alarming discovery, the lead scientist said, and his voice had dropped to almost a whisper now, is that humans regularly engage in a practice they call surgery, where they deliberately cut open their own bodies to repair damage inside. And then they seal the wound and continue living as if nothing happened. The room went completely silent. They cut themselves open, the queen said slowly, on purpose, to fix things inside their bodies. And then they just close the wound and walk away. Yes, my queen. And they survive this? They survive this routinely, my queen. It is one of their most common medical practices. Queen Salida turned to face Marcus, and her mirror eyes were wider than he had ever seen them. And he could see his own reflection in them, looking small but surprisingly confident. "Your species," she said, and her voice was quieter than before. "What world could possibly produce creatures like you?" "Earth," Marcus said simply. "A world where everything wanted to kill us, where we had to compete with predators for food and survive diseases that could wipe out entire populations and endure weather that ranged from burning heat to freezing cold. A world where only the toughest and most adaptable could survive long enough to have children." He held up his wounded arm and showed her the scab that was already beginning to flake away at the edges, revealing fresh pink skin beneath. "We did not become this way by choice," he said. "We became this way because our planet demanded it. Because anything less than this would have meant extinction. Because Earth does not tolerate weakness." The queen stared at his healing wound for a long moment, and Marcus could see her processing everything she had learned. Could see the calculations happening behind those alien eyes. "You are not the fragile creatures we believed you to be," she finally said. "No," Marcus agreed. "We are not." The lead scientist stepped forward hesitantly, its entire body trembling now. "My queen," it said, "there is one more thing you should know. One more piece of data from our analysis. Speak." "The human experiences pain from his wound," the scientist said. "Our scans confirm that his nervous system is registering significant discomfort. But he has not complained once. He has not asked for relief. He simply continues to function as if the pain does not exist." The queen looked at Marcus with something new in her eyes. Something that looked almost like awe. "You feel pain," she said, "and you simply ignore it?" "Pain is just information," Marcus said. "It tells me something is wrong, but it does not get to decide what I do about it. My body keeps working and my mind keeps thinking, and the pain is just there, like background noise that I can choose to pay attention to or not." The queen was silent for a very long time. Then she spoke a single word that made every scientist in the room freeze in terror. "Impossible." But Marcus knew it was not impossible. Knew that every human who had ever lived had done exactly what he was doing now. Had pushed through pain and injury and kept going because that was simply what humans did. Looking at the fear in the eyes of these ancient conquerors, he was beginning to understand just how special that really was. Word spread through the Valkyrie fleet like fire through dry grass. And Marcus did not need to understand their clicking language to know that everyone was talking about him. The Thursh guards who came to check on him no longer looked at him with contempt or amusement. And instead they kept their distance, and their weapons were always raised. And their multifaceted eyes watched his every movement like he might attack at any moment. He found this deeply amusing because he was still injured and unarmed and locked in a cell. But apparently, that no longer mattered to creatures who had just learned that humans could survive almost anything on the third day of his captivity. Marcus received an unexpected visitor. She was smaller than the other Valkyrie. Her carapace a soft blue color that reminded Marcus of the sky on a clear summer day. And she moved hesitantly, like she was afraid to get too close to him. "I am Kethra," she said in careful, practiced words of his language. "I am a translator, and I have been assigned to speak with you." "Nice to meet you, Kethra," Marcus said. And he tried to make his voice as friendly as possible, because this was the first Valkyrie who had not looked at him like he was either an enemy or a monster. "I am Marcus. I know who you are," Kethra said. And she sat down on the floor outside his cell, because apparently there were no chairs in Valkyrie architecture. "Everyone knows who you are now. The human who would not die. I prefer to think of it as the human who is really good at staying alive," Marcus said. "But I suppose your version is more dramatic." Kethra made a sound that might have been a laugh, and her mirror eyes seemed less cold than the others. "More curious than afraid. I have been reading about your species," she said. "The reports that our scouts made when they first discovered your world. And I thought they must have been exaggerations, because no species could really be as strange as they described. And now?" Marcus asked. "Now I think maybe they were not strange enough." Marcus leaned back against the crystal wall of his cell and studied the young translator. And he could see that she was genuinely curious about him in a way that went beyond simple fear. "What did the reports say about us?" He asked. Kethra was quiet for a moment, as if deciding how much to tell him. "They said your people fight wars against each other constantly," she finally said. "That you have weapons capable of destroying your own world many times over, and yet you continue to exist. And they said you engage in activities that seem designed to cause yourself harm. Climbing to high places and then jumping off, running until your bodies fail, fighting each other for entertainment. That is all true," Marcus admitted. "But that is not the strangest part," Kethra continued, and her voice dropped to almost a whisper. "The strangest part is what happens when your people are wounded in these activities. Because according to the reports, they simply get back up and do it again." Marcus thought about all the athletes he had known who had broken bones and torn muscles and still gone back to their sports. And all the soldiers who had been shot and blown up and still returned to duty. And all the ordinary people who had survived car accidents and falls and diseases, and had just kept living their lives. "That is what humans do," he said simply. "We get hurt, and then we heal, and then we move on. Because what is the alternative?" "The alternative is death," Kethra said. "For every other species in the galaxy, serious injury means death. There is no healing. There is no moving on. There's only the wound and then the end." "That sounds terrible," Marcus said. And he meant it. "We never thought of it as terrible because we never knew there was another way," Kethra said. "But now we know about your people and everything has changed." She looked at him with those mirror eyes, and Marcus could see his reflection in them. And he looked better than he had 3 days ago. Stronger and healthier despite the poor food and the cold cell. "The soldiers are afraid," Kethra said quietly. "I hear them talking when they do not know I am listening. And they are saying that going to war against humans would be suicide. That your people cannot be killed by normal means. That you would just keep coming no matter how many times we cut you down. We are not invincible," Marcus said. Because he felt he should be honest with her. We can be killed. We do die. But you were right that it takes more than most species would expect. One of the commanders pulled up old records this morning. Kethra said. Reports from early scouting missions that were dismissed as impossible. And they described humans who had lost limbs and continued fighting. Humans who had survived diseases that killed 90% of everyone who caught them. Humans who had been impaled and shot and burned and still refused to stop. Sounds about right, Marcus said. There was one report, Kethra said. And her voice was shaking now, about a human who was attacked by a large predator and had most of his face torn off. And he walked for miles through wilderness to find help, and he survived. And the report said he was upset because he missed a meeting he was supposed to attend. Marcus had heard that story. Everyone on Earth had heard that story, and he smiled because it was such a perfectly human thing to do. Hugh Glass, he said. That happened a long time ago, but yes, that really happened. Kethra was silent for a long moment. If a wound does not kill humans, she finally asked, then what does? Marcus thought carefully about how to answer this question, because he knew that whatever he said would spread through the ship, just like everything else had spread. Old age. Eventually, he said, disease sometimes. But less and less as our medicine improves. Accidents, if they are severe enough. And violence if it is enough to destroy something we cannot repair. But even then it takes a lot more than most people would expect. Your people sound like nightmares, Kethra whispered. To you. Maybe, Marcus said. To us, we are just people living our lives and doing our best to survive. We do not think of ourselves as special. We just think of ourselves as human. Kethra stood up and looked at him through the shimmering barrier. And there was something in her eyes now that Marcus had not seen in any Valkyrie before. Respect. I will come back tomorrow, she said. If that is acceptable to you, I would like that, Marcus said. It gets lonely in here. Kethra made that sound that might have been a laugh again, and then she turned and walked away. Her soft blue carapace disappearing around the corner of the crystal hallway. Marcus watched her go, and then looked down at his arm. At the wound that was now almost completely healed. Nothing left but a thin pink line that would fade to a faint scar within a few weeks. Somewhere on this ship, thousands of alien soldiers were learning to fear a species they had planned to conquer. And somewhere an ancient queen was having to reconsider everything she thought she knew about the universe. And somewhere a young translator was starting to see humans not as monsters or prey, but as people worth understanding. Marcus smiled and settled back against the cold crystal wall. Things were starting to get interesting. On the 7th day of his captivity, Commander Marcus Cole was summoned before Queen Silitha once more. But this time, he was not brought to the Great Hall with its thousands of watching soldiers. Instead, the guards led him to a smaller chamber with walls of deep purple crystal that seemed to pulse with inner light. And the only furniture was 2 chairs facing each other across a low table made of polished stone. The queen was already there when he arrived. And she was alone. No guards and no scientists and no advisors. Just her massive form folded into one of the chairs like a spider waiting its web. Sit, she commanded. And Marcus sat for a long moment. Neither of them spoke. And Marcus used the time to study the ancient queen more closely than he had been able to before. And he noticed things he had missed in their previous encounters. There were scars on her carapace, dozens of them. Thin lines of lighter color that marked places where her shell had been damaged and then mended. And he realized with some surprise that she too had been wounded many times over her long life. You are looking at my scars, the queen said. And it was not a question. I am, Marcus admitted. I thought your people did not heal from wounds. We do not, the queen said. These marks were made by my surgeons. My shell was cracked in battles long ago, and they sealed the damage with special materials. But the wounds themselves never healed. They will never heal. They will be with me until I die. "I am sorry," Marcus said. And he meant it. The queen made a sound that was almost like a sigh. "I have ruled the Valkyrie Dominion for 300 of your years," she said. "I have conquered 47 worlds and destroyed 11 species that refused to submit. And I have never once doubted that the Valkyrie were the greatest power in the galaxy." She paused, and her mirror eyes fixed on Marcus with an intensity that made him want to look away. But he held her gaze because he sensed that this moment was important. "And then we found your people," the queen continued, "scattered across a handful of worlds at the edge of our territory, building your little ships and exploring the stars like children playing in a garden. And we thought you would be easy to conquer. Just another weak species to add to our collection. But we were not easy," Marcus said. "No," the queen agreed. "You were not, and at first we did not understand why our soldiers were having such difficulty. Why battles that should have been simple were becoming complicated. Why humans who should have been dead kept fighting." She leaned forward in her chair, her long limbs folding beneath her. "Now I understand," she said. "Now I have seen with my own eyes what your species can do. And I have spent the last 7 days thinking about what it would mean to go to war against a people who simply refuse to die. And what have you decided?" Marcus, asked the queen, was silent for a long moment. And when she spoke, her voice was quieter than he had ever heard it. "I have destroyed 11 species," she said. "And each time it was easy, because when we wounded them, they died. And when enough of them died, the rest lost hope. And when they lost hope, they surrendered or scattered, and we hunted down what remained." "That sounds efficient," Marcus said. "It was," the queen agreed. "But it would not work against your people, would it?" Marcus thought about human history, about all the wars and invasions and occupations that had failed because the conquered people simply would not stop fighting, about guerrilla campaigns that had lasted decades and resistance movements that had survived everything thrown at them. "No," he said. "It would not. If we invaded your worlds," the queen said slowly, "we might win the first battles. We might even win many battles. But we would never truly conquer you, because every wound we dealt would heal, and every soldier we thought we had killed would rise again. And you would keep fighting until one of us was extinct." "That is probably accurate," Marcus said. "And the cost," the queen continued. "The cost would be everything. Every ship and every soldier and every resource we have. All spent on a war that could never truly be won." She fell silent, and Marcus waited, because he could feel that she was building towards something important. "I did not come here to offer you mercy," the queen finally said. "I do not know if I am even capable of mercy anymore, but I am capable of wisdom. And wisdom tells me that there are some enemies it is better to befriend than to fight." Marcus felt his heart beating faster, but he kept his expression calm. "What are you proposing?" he asked. "An alliance," the queen said. And the words seemed to cost her something to speak. "Your species and mine, working together instead of destroying each other. Because I have realized something in these past 7 days. Something that changes everything." "What is that?" "If humans are what you say they are," the queen said, "if your bodies can truly survive what you claim they can survive, then you are not the weakest species in the galaxy. You are potentially the strongest. And I would rather have you as allies than enemies." She extended one long segmented limb toward him, and Marcus realized she was offering him something like a handshake. "I am giving you something I have never given anyone before," she said. "A choice, because you can refuse this alliance, and I will return you to your people anyway. And we will see if war between our species is truly as terrible as I fear. Or you can accept, and together we will build something new." Marcus looked at her outstretched limb and thought about everything that had happened since he woke up in that cold cell with a wound on his arm that should have killed him according to every other species in the galaxy. Thought about his crew who had died in the battle, and about his family back on Earth who probably thought he was dead. and about all the humans who would fight and die if war came between their species and the Valkyrian. Then he extended his own arm. The same arm that had been wounded, the arm that now bore only a faint scar where the cut had healed. "You are making a smart choice, Your Majesty," he said. The queen wrapped her long fingers around his hand, and her grip was surprisingly gentle for a creature who had destroyed entire civilizations. "I know," she said. "That is why I am making it." The alliance was signed 3 months later in a ceremony that was broadcast across both Valkyrie space and human territory. And Marcus Cole stood beside Queen Celitha as representatives from both species exchanged documents and pledges of peace. Other alien empires watched in disbelief as the ancient conquerors bowed to the newcomers. Not in defeat, but in respect. And in the halls of the Dominion, a new saying began to spread among soldiers who had learned to fear the healing creatures from Earth do not wound a human. They whispered to each other, "You will only make them angry." And in the years that followed, the alliance between humans and Valkyrie grew stronger, built not on shared culture or shared history, but on a simple truth that Queen Celitha had recognized before anyone else. Some species were too stubborn to conquer, too resilient to destroy, too determined to ever truly defeat. And the wisest course was not to fight them, but to stand beside them. Marcus returned to Earth a hero, though he never felt like one. And when people asked him how he had survived his captivity and convinced an ancient queen to make peace, he always gave the same answer: "I just refused to die." He would say with a smile, "That is all any human ever does, and that in the end was enough."